The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and Cashin Voss stepped out like he owned the building. Because he did. Voss Industries had acquired the Meridian Tower 3 years ago, back when Cashin was still trying to prove something to the world, or maybe just to himself. Now the acquisition felt like a footnote. He had larger things on his mind today. The Hargrove merger. $12 billion. 5 years of positioning, negotiating, and outmaneuvering competitors on 3 continents, all coming down to a single dinner tonight at Orem, the most exclusive private dining establishment in the city. His assistant, Declan Marsh, fell into step beside him immediately, tablet in hand, already talking. Table is confirmed for 8 o'clock. Mr. Hargrove is flying in from Zurich and lands at 6:15. His legal team has reviewed the final draft, and there are no outstanding objections. Tonight should be a formality. Should be, Cashin said flatly. Will be, Declan corrected himself. Cashin didn't respond. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the corridor and looked out over the city, a sprawling, indifferent grid of light and steel. He'd built his empire in this city. He'd also lost something irreplaceable here 2 years ago. He tried not to think about that. He mostly failed. Orem occupied the top floor of a converted heritage building in the old financial district. It had no sign outside, no menu on any website. You either knew how to get a table or you didn't, and most people didn't. The dining room was all dark walnut, amber lighting, and hushed conversation. The kind of place where deals were sealed and secrets were kept. Cashin arrived at 7:30, as he always did. 30 minutes early to every meeting. His father had taught him that. The man who waits controls nothing. The man who is already there controls everything. He was shown to his private table near the window. He ordered still water, declined the wine list, and opened the merger documents on his phone one final time. He was halfway through clause 14 when he heard a tray hit the floor. The sound was sharp, ceramic and glass shattering against marble, followed by a collective intake of breath from nearby tables. Cashin looked up instinctively, the way anyone does when something breaks in a quiet room. A server was crouching down near the entrance to the kitchen corridor, gathering the pieces of a broken water pitcher and 2 shattered glasses. Her uniform was slightly too large for her frame. Her hair was pinned back, but a few strands had escaped. She was moving carefully, deliberately, the way someone moves when they are exhausted and trying very hard not to show it. And then she turned her face slightly to reach a piece of glass near the baseboard, and Cashin felt the air leave his lungs. Nora Callahan. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in nearly 2 years. He'd forbidden himself that indulgence. And yet here it was in his throat, fully formed, threatening to come out. She hadn't seen him. She was still collecting the broken pieces, head down, methodical. And then Cashin noticed what he hadn't registered in the first shocked second. The uniform wasn't just large. It was hiding something. The way she shifted her weight, the careful way she knelt and rose. She was pregnant. Visibly, unmistakably, significantly pregnant. Cashin's hand tightened around his phone until his knuckles whitened. The manager appeared from across the room like a shark who'd smelled blood. His name tag read Philip Greer, floor manager. He was a compact man in his 50s with steel gray hair and the particular brand of cruelty that develops in people who have small authority and exercise it completely. Brooks. His voice was low but carried. This is the second incident this week. Nora straightened. I apologize, Mr. Greer. The tray was, I don't want explanations. He stepped closer. I want you to understand that. This establishment has a standard. That standard is not compatible with, he gestured vaguely at her, at all of her. This situation continuing indefinitely. Several diners were watching now. Nora's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'll clean it up and reset the table, she said quietly. It won't happen again tonight. It won't happen again at all, Greer said. We'll discuss your status after service. My office. He turned and walked away. Nora stood very still for a moment. Something moved across her face, not defeat, exactly. Something older and more complicated than defeat. Then she bent carefully to collect the last piece of broken glass. Leave it. She froze. Cashin was standing now, 3 feet away from her. He didn't know when he'd stood up. His body had made that decision without consulting him. Nora looked up slowly. The color drained from her face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the restaurant continued. Quiet conversations, the clink of silverware, a sommelier describing a vintage to a couple near the fireplace. The world entirely indifferent to the fact that something seismic was happening near table 9. Cashin, she said. Just his name. Nothing attached to it. Nora. He kept his voice even with considerable effort. Sit down. I'm working. You're bleeding. He nodded at her hand. A small cut from the glass, a thin line of red across her palm. She looked at it as though she hadn't noticed. She probably hadn't. I'm fine, she said. You're not fine. He glanced at her abdomen, then back at her face, and made himself ask the question that was detonating quietly inside him. How far along? Her chin came up. That's not your concern. Nora. Cashin. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it had iron in it. Please. Not here. Not tonight. He studied her face. She was thinner than he remembered except for the pregnancy. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was dressed in a borrowed uniform in a restaurant she was about to be fired from, and she was looking at him with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and fierce, almost desperate pride. He wanted to say 100 things. He said none of them. Come to my table when you have a moment, he said instead. Please. She shook her head slightly. As a courtesy, he said quietly. That's all I'm asking. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, short, reluctant, and turned back toward the kitchen. Cashin returned to his table. The merger documents were still open on his phone. He didn't read a single word of them for the next 20 minutes. When Nora came to his table, she came as a server, pad in hand, shoulders squared, professional. She stood just far enough away to make it clear this was not a personal conversation. Can I get you anything else, Mr. Voss? It wasn't a question. It was armor. Sit down, Nora. I can't sit with guests during service. You're bleeding through the bandage you wrapped around your hand in the kitchen, and you've been on your feet for... He glanced at the clock. How long? A beat. 9 hours. Sit down. She sat, not comfortably, on the edge of the chair, back straight, like she was ready to stand again in an instant. Cashin looked at her in the amber light of the restaurant. 2 years. He had spent 2 years building walls he believed were necessary, and now they felt like the most elaborate waste of time and stone he had ever committed to. You're still in the city, he said. Yes. You never left. Something flickered in her eyes. No. You told me you were leaving. That there was someone in. I know what I told you. Silence. Why? He asked. She looked out the window at the city below. A long pause. When she looked back at him, whatever she'd been deciding in that pause was settled. Not here, she said again. And maybe not ever. That's my choice to make, Cashin, not yours. Nora, is the baby. Don't. Her voice cracked slightly. She pressed it back together. Please don't ask me that right now. I'm asking you. As someone who once mattered to you, please don't ask me that tonight. Cashin looked at her for a long time. Okay, he said finally. Okay. She stood. Your guest will be here soon. I'll send someone else to your table. She walked back toward the kitchen, and Cashin watched her go, and felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years, the specific, nauseating sensation of understanding that he had been profoundly, catastrophically wrong about something. The Hargrove dinner happened. Cashin sat across from a silver-haired industrialist and smiled and negotiated and signed where he was supposed to sign. His hands were steady. His voice was measured. $12 billion changed direction without a tremor. He was barely present for any of it. Halfway through dessert, he saw Nora emerge from the kitchen corridor, moving toward the staff exit with her coat and bag. She wasn't walking right. There was something hesitant and then overcorrected in her gait, the movement of someone managing pain. Excuse me, Cashin said to Hargrove. He crossed the restaurant in 15 seconds. He found her in the service corridor, one hand against the wall, breathing in a way that was too deliberate to be normal. She looked up when she heard him, and the expression on her face was briefly, nakedly frightened before she controlled it. I'm fine, she said preemptively. You are not fine. He was already reaching for his phone. Tell me what you're feeling. It's nothing. Braxton Hicks, probably. I just need to sit. Your lips are white. He dialed. Declan. Car. Service entrance of Orem. Right now. He hung up. When did this start? Cashin. When? She closed her eyes briefly. About an hour ago. I thought it would pass. Headache? Yes. Vision. A pause. A little blurry. On the left. He knew enough to know that was serious. He'd made himself learn, after everything. Too late, He'd thought at the time. Maybe not. Okay, he said, and his voice came out very calm, the way it did when he was most afraid. We're going to the hospital. Right now. I can call a cab. Nora. He stepped in front of her and waited until she looked at him. Let me do this. Just this. Please. She looked at him for a long moment. Then something in her, some exhausted, battered, fiercely independent part of her, let go, just slightly. She nodded. St. Benedine Medical Center was 15 minutes away. It felt like an hour. Nora sat in the back seat with her eyes closed, breathing measured and slow, one hand resting on her abdomen. Cashin sat beside her and said nothing useful and everything practical. Called ahead to the hospital, spoke to an on-call physician, had Declan contact her building's emergency line to retrieve her medical records release. You have her file number? Cashin asked him. Not yet. Working on it. Work faster. Nora opened her eyes. How do you know my file would be at St. Benedine? I don't. It was a starting point. A pause. I've been keeping track of you, Nora. From a distance. I know that's not. He stopped. I needed to know you were safe. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully decode. You were watching me. Not watching. Just aware. Declan checked in occasionally. Made sure you weren't. He stopped again. I didn't interfere. I just needed to know. You knew I was here. Working at Orem. I knew you were working somewhere in the district. I didn't know where exactly. He met her eyes. If I'd known it was Orem, I would have. What? Stayed away? She shook her head slightly. Or come sooner? He didn't answer. Because he genuinely didn't know. The emergency team met them at the entrance. Within minutes, Nora was in a bay, monitors attached. A young resident taking her blood pressure with an expression that told Cashin everything he needed to know before anyone said a word. He stood outside the curtain and listened to the numbers. 160 over 110. He closed his eyes for 2 seconds. Then he opened them and took out his phone. Declan, I need the best maternal fetal medicine specialist in this city at St. Benedine in the next 30 minutes. I don't care what it costs. It's 11:15 at night. 30 minutes, Declan. He hung up and leaned against the wall and thought about the last 2 years. The night Nora had told him she was leaving. The careful, devastating calm in her voice. There's someone else. I'm sorry. This is better for both of us. He had believed her. He had chosen to believe her. He realized now, because the alternative, that she had a reason to leave that he was responsible for, was unbearable. He had signed the divorce papers in 4 days. He had told himself it was dignity. Now he wondered if it was just cowardice in a different coat. Dr. Amara Solis arrived at 11:40. Not quite 30 minutes, but close enough that Cashin filed a mental note of appreciation for Declan's efficiency. She was tall, unhurried, and had the specific calm of someone who had navigated genuine emergencies so many times that fear had become just another variable to account for. She emerged from the curtain after 20 minutes. Severe preeclampsia, she said. Blood pressure is dangerously elevated. There's protein in her urine, and she's showing early signs of liver involvement. We need to deliver tonight. Cashin absorbed this. How far along is she? 34 weeks. The baby is viable. Lungs are developed enough. We'll administer steroids to accelerate maturity and then perform a cesarean within the next 2 hours. Are you family? A pause. I'm her ex-husband. Dr. Solis looked at him steadily. She's listed as having no emergency contacts. Is there anyone else we should call? No, Cashin said. There's no one else. Then she may want you present. That's her decision. What I can tell you is that she was very lucky tonight. Another few hours, and we'd be having a different conversation. She went back behind the curtain. Cashin sat down in a plastic chair in the corridor and put his face in his hands. Nora asked for him. He wasn't sure she would, but she did. He sat beside her bed while they waited for the steroids to work, in a room that hummed with monitors and smelled of antiseptic, and they talked, really talked, for the first time in 2 years. The urgency of the situation stripped away the architecture of pride and hurt they'd both constructed and left something rawer and more honest beneath. Tell me why, he said. The real reason. She was quiet for a long time. Outside the room, someone was wheeled past on a gurney. A PA crackled. Do you remember Silas Wren? She finally asked. Cashin went very still. Yes. Silas Wren. A name from his past. The period before Voss Industries became what it was, when Cashin had been hungry and aggressive and not always careful about who he aligned with. Ren had been a financier of the kind who operated in spaces that weren't quite legal. Cashin had used his capital once, early on, knowing what he was. He'd spent years carefully, deliberately disentangling himself. He thought he'd succeeded. Ren contacted me 14 months ago, Nora said, while we were still married. He knew things about your early dealings, about specific transactions. He said if you didn't give him a 20% stake in the Hargrove partnership, he would go public with everything. It would have destroyed you, Cashin. Not just professionally. There were things in those early files that could have meant criminal exposure. Cashin said nothing. I was the leverage, she continued, her voice steady now that she'd started. He said if I stayed with you, he'd release it all. If I left, if I removed myself from your life convincingly, he'd stay quiet. He wanted me gone because I was the one person who might convince you to fight him. He knew that about us. A faint, painful near smile. He knew you'd fight for me. He needed me not to be there for you to fight for. You should have told me, Cashin said. His voice was very quiet. You would have fought him. Yes. And it would have destroyed everything you built. Nora, everything your father built before you. Her eyes met his. I wasn't willing to let that happen. I wasn't willing to be the reason. You were my wife. I know. Her voice broke slightly. She pressed it back. I know that. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the lie. I have been every single day. Cashin looked at the monitor tracking his child's heartbeat, a sound like a small determined fist knocking on a door, and tried to locate his anger. It was there. He could feel the shape of it. But beneath it was something larger and more overwhelming. The baby, he said. Is it yours? She met his eyes. Yes. I found out 6 weeks after I left. I almost called you 100 times. Why didn't you? Because Ren was still watching. Because calling you would have undone everything. She exhaled. And because I was afraid. Of what? That you wouldn't believe me. A pause. That you'd believe the version of me you decided I was. Cashin was quiet for a long time. What changed tonight? He asked. Why tell me now? Because I'm in a hospital bed and I'm scared, she said simply. And because you came. You could have walked away when you saw me. You didn't. Outside, the city was dark and sprawling and indifferent. Inside this small room, something that had been locked for 2 years was slowly, painfully opening. Silas Wren, Cashin said quietly. I'm going to need everything you have. I kept records, she said. Everything. Every message, every meeting, recorded where I could. I wasn't going to let him have the only copy of the story. Despite everything, Cashin almost smiled. This was the Nora he knew. Thorough. Undefeated. Of course you did, he said. The cesarean took 41 minutes. Cashin stood in the corridor outside and felt the 41 minutes like 41 years. When Dr. Solis came out, her expression was carefully neutral for exactly 1 second before it settled into something that might, in a different light, have been called relief. Nora is stable, she said. Baby is 4 pounds, 2 ounces. A girl. Cashin blinked. A girl. She's in the NICU. Premature, but breathing independently. Her numbers are good. Dr. Solis studied him. Are you all right, Mr. Voss? Yes, he said, and sat down heavily in the plastic chair. They named her Iris. It was Nora's choice and Cashin didn't argue it, though he spent a long time after standing at the NICU window looking at his daughter, 4 pounds, 2 ounces, with a shock of dark hair and a fierceness in her small face that he recognized, and thinking that the name suited something he couldn't quite articulate. Iris. A flower. A part of the eye. Something through which light is admitted. He went home for 3 hours that first night. Changed. Came back. He didn't stop coming back. Declan found him on the 3rd morning in the hospital's family lounge, laptop open, 2 coffees going cold beside him, working through documents he'd had transferred from the office. You haven't slept, Declan said. I slept in the chair. For 40 minutes. I have the security footage. Cashin looked up. Have you found everything I asked for? Declan sat down across from him and opened his own tablet. Silas Wren, 61 years old. 3 outstanding civil suits, 2 in jurisdictions outside the country. His financing operation has been under informal SEC scrutiny for 18 months. They haven't moved yet because they're building the case. And the recordings Nora made, he paused. Cashin, she got everything. His voice, clearly, explicitly stating the threat. In 3 separate recordings over 2 months. She was thorough. She was building a case the whole time. I think she always intended to use it. Eventually. She was just waiting until she was safe enough. Cashin was quiet. The early transaction records Ren was holding over you. Declan continued carefully. I've spoken to the legal team. The exposure is real but manageable, particularly if we cooperate proactively with the SEC and contextualize the timeline. With Nora's recordings, you're not just defending. You're prosecuting. Good. Cashin closed the laptop. Give me a meeting with the federal attorney's office. This week. Already working on it. A beat. There's one more thing. Philip Greer, the manager at Orem. Yes. He has a documented history of complaints from female staff. 3 former employees, 2 still under NDA. Orem's ownership, a hospitality group called Caldwell Partners, has been aware for some time. Cashin looked at him steadily. By Orem. Declan blinked. The whole. The building, the brand, the hospitality group, if necessary. Whatever it takes. He paused. And when it's done, Greer is gone. The NDAs are released. The women who signed them are compensated properly, whatever they're owed. Declan wrote this down without comment. This was one of the things Cashin valued most about him. What do you want to do with the restaurant itself? Declan asked. Cashin thought about it. About Nora on her feet for 9 hours. About the shadows under her eyes. About all the people who worked difficult jobs in difficult conditions for people who never learned their names. Keep it running. Better wages, proper benefits, protected scheduling for anyone with medical needs. He stood and picked up one of the cold coffees. The food was actually very good. That shouldn't go to waste. Nora was moved out of the ICU on day 4. By day 6, she could walk the corridor slowly, one hand on the wall, stopping at the NICU window each time to press her palm against the glass and watch Iris breathe. Cashin was there most of those times. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just stood at the window in the particular silence of people who have been through something together and don't need to fill it. On the 7th day, Nora said, "You don't have to keep coming." "I know," Cashin said. "I'm not asking you to be here out of obligation." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Then why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because she's mine. And so is the answer to what happened between us, when we're ready to find it." He glanced at her. "I'm not asking for anything tonight, Nora. I'm not asking for anything this week. I'm just here, if that's all right." She looked back through the glass at Iris, who was sleeping with the absolute conviction of someone who has decided the world is safe enough for now. "It's all right," Nora said quietly. Silas Wren was arrested on a Thursday morning 3 weeks later. Cashin was not present for it. He was at the hospital, where Nora was preparing for discharge, and where Iris had been cleared to leave the NICU. 5 pounds, 4 ounces now, eyes open and taking in the world with an expression of profound assessment. Declan texted him a single line, "Done." Cashin showed it to Nora. She read it and nodded, and for a moment something moved across her face that was too complicated to name. Relief and grief, and the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a weight for so long that putting it down feels strange. "It's over," Cashin said. "Yes." She looked at Iris. "It's over." He found her a proper apartment. Not as a gift she hadn't asked for, but as something they negotiated carefully, respecting her independence on her terms. She went back to work eventually, not at Orem, which was under new management and transition, but at a design firm where she'd worked before they'd met. She was good at her work. She'd always been good at her work. They moved slowly. That was the only way to move after what had been broken between them. Some evenings Cashin came to the apartment and sat on the floor with Iris, who by 3 months had developed a habit of gripping his finger with her whole fist and refusing to release it. A grip surprisingly strong for someone who still couldn't hold her own head up. He found this unreasonably moving. Nora would watch from the kitchen doorway sometimes, making tea, and he would look up and find her watching, and neither of them would say anything. They had time now. That was the thing neither of them had expected to have. On a Saturday in early spring, Cashin took Nora to the building that had been Orem. The renovation was half finished. Workers moved through the space in the gray morning light, stripping the overdone darkness of the old restaurant and replacing it with something warmer and more honest. Pale wood, open shelving, light from the newly expanded windows falling across floors that would soon carry different footsteps. "What's it going to be?" Nora asked. "A restaurant. A good one." He looked around the space. "Better kitchen, better wages. A place that earns its reputation from the actual food rather than from making people feel like they've been permitted entrance." He glanced at her. There's going to be a whole section of the kitchen training program dedicated to developing staff from within. Promotions based on skill rather than other factors. She was quiet for a moment. What are you calling it? He looked at her. I haven't decided. I thought you might have an opinion. She looked around the space, at the winter light coming through the tall windows, at the bones of something being rebuilt, and thought for a moment. Something simple, she said. Something that doesn't need to announce itself. He nodded. They were quiet together in the unfinished room, dust in the air and the sound of work being done, and the city outside continuing its indifferent hum. Cashin, Nora said. Yes. She looked at him. Thank you. For not walking away in that corridor. He looked back at her for a long moment. Thank you, he said. For keeping the recordings. She laughed. A real laugh. Unguarded. The first one he'd heard from her in 2 years. It sounded exactly the way he remembered. They named the restaurant Iris. It opened on a Thursday in April, to no fanfare, no press event, no launch party. Just food, and light, and the quiet competence of a staff who had been treated like professionals and performed accordingly. On the first night, a young woman who had previously worked at the old restaurant under Philip Greer came in with her sister, sat by the window, and ate a meal she said was the best she'd had in years. She left a review that said, simply, this place feels like it was built by someone who actually cares. Declan showed it to Cashin. Cashin folded it and put it in his pocket and said nothing. But he kept it.